Everyone. Just a second as I grab my guests on stage. Cool. Shouldn't be a moment. Awesome. Hello. Joining me on stage this morning is Nighthouse, CEO and co-founder of Relab, and Leonie Freeman, CEO of Property Council New Zealand. And I'm Stacey. I'm the sales and marketing coordinator here at Relab. In today's session, we're going to have a 30 to 40 minute chat around innovation in the property industry. We're going to start with Leonie's going to talk a bit to her background and what she does in the property industry. And then we'll go into what's happening in the property industry at the moment and how innovation plays quite a big role. To kick off, Leonie, thank you so much for coming on with us today. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what you do in your role as CEO of Property Council?
Sure, and thanks very much for the invite. It's great to be here. And for those on the line, they might not be aware, but you guys presented at our Property Council conference in our Innovations Showcase recently, which we really, really appreciated, and actually won the Innovation Showcase. So that was awesome. So just a little bit about me. I've spent my whole career in property, which when I actually look back and add up some of the years, it's just over 30 years now, which is a bit scary. I originally trained as a property valuer, and that was quite a good background in property. But I also always had an interest in technology. And so early in my career, I was involved in sort of valuation, but also setting up computer systems for companies and figuring out how we could use technology. And then after I'd done an OE, I sort of came back and I thought, right, I really want to focus on the areas that really interest me rather than straight valuation. And I started working for myself. And so I focused on technology, education, and research. And I suppose at that stage of my career, I wanted to, I was always asking the questions around, how could things be different or better? And, it's all about questioning the unquestionable. So some of the first things I did there was back in 1995, I started looking at the internet and seeing what impact that would have in the real estate industry. And I thought, as a bit of an example of major disruption, because probably many on the call won't understand what it used to be like back then, but before you could go online and search for what you needed for a house to rent or buy, you actually had to go through all these really thick magazines, page by page, because they weren't organized in any logic. And I thought it was really important that the industry had this one opportunity to actually own and control effectively the newspaper of the future. So I was the one behind the launch of Relens in August 1996, which actually has just celebrated 25 years and now is known as realestate.co. After doing that, I learned a lot, and I thought I then looked at some other business opportunities, and I ended up buying a rundown property management company. And not because I was an expert in property management, but I saw again an opportunity that if you brought the technology in with the property management, which was like stepping back 20 years, you could create a really good business and create something with value. So did that, sold that in 2007. And after that, and since then, I've really been focused a bit more on contribution and making a difference. And I was trying to look at how do you bring those sort of private sector entrepreneurial business skills into the public sector. So I was really involved with the setup of the new super city in Auckland. Was brought into Housing New Zealand in 2014 to lead the turnaround of the development program. So I've done sort of things like that. So it sort of gave me quite a different perspective. And when you're an entrepreneur and private sector focused, the public sector is very different. And then in 2016, because I've done a huge amount in housing, I launched a housing solution to solve Auckland's housing crisis as a way of trying to show some leadership in this space. And got very much the same reaction as I did when I did Relens 25 years ago. Everyone said, "Oh, Leonie, you're crazy. Nobody can fix housing." But actually, we can. We just have to look at it in a completely different way. And then I did that for a while, and I was approached 3.5 years ago, about the role of Property Council. And Property Council, for those that aren't familiar with it, is the membership organisation that represents the whole property sector. So it's everybody from owners, developers, property managers, and all the associated professional services. So it's quite extensive, and it's across commercial, residential, retail, and industrial. And I actually haven't had a job since I was 28, so I've always worked for myself. So the thought of having a job was quite a change for me. But I took it for two reasons, and they're both very purpose-driven. One was around, we've got some big problems in property in New Zealand. Housing is obviously the one that gets the most focus, but there are plenty of others. And I thought this is a good, and we as an industry, we need to take a much bigger leadership role in fixing it. And I thought this is a good place to do it. And the other reason was I spent 30 years in property, and I've done just about every part of it, and I love it. But there's not a lot of women at a senior level, and I really want to shift the diversity and inclusion dimension in property, and I want that to be a bit of a legacy. So that's sort of in a bit of a nutshell. It's been quite mixed. It's not the traditional career path, and done some very different things.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so good and interesting, though, is all the diversity. Doing a bit of research in today's webinar, I know Property Council's had a lot to do with this, is I've realised how big the property industry is. Just a few stats for the audience. The property industry makes up of 15% of economic activity, 9% of the workforce, and currently and counting 41.2 billion in GDP, which is, I can't even fathom how big that is in my mind. With these large numbers in mind, there's a lot of pressure going on in the industry. We see a massive amount of demand, whilst the supply is under a lot of stress, like increasing prices, shortage of materials, the time it takes to build, and there's so many factors that are contributing to this strain. What are the top 3 challenges you see in the industry at the moment?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges in the industry, and there are different ones in different sectors. So obviously, if you take housing is the one that gets the most oxygen. It affects just about everyone. So we've got major issues in housing, and the one that you probably don't hear about the most, which I think is actually the starting point, is the whole ecosystem around housing isn't working. It's quite broken. It's very siloed, and there's no way at the moment where you can actually bring everybody together to solve the problems. So because what you tend to hear is in the media is, look, it's the RMA, or it's consenting, or it's the lack of capability in the construction sector, or it's material supply, or it's zoning, or and the list goes on. And so it is all of those other things as well, but you can't just fix one of them in isolation. That's why I think this overall systems approach to housing is really important. Then we have a whole lot of these sort of functional issues which are causing us challenges. Then there is one around innovation, and how do we actually bring innovation in? Because there's lots of great ideas, but it's really hard to bring it in. And then the last one, I think, is a societal thing, where we have a real challenge around people and change. And most people don't like change, therefore they don't like new housing and new developments. And so how do we take our communities on this journey when we're going through this change, so that at the end of it all, it's not just about more housing. We want to build really, really good communities and cities in New Zealand, because housing is often at the heart of really strong communities. So it's sort of, how do we deal with all of these issues and deal with them together?
Yeah, interestingly, last week on the new housing density rules, and it's funny you talk about resistance to changes. There was a lot of different commentary behind that, and I think that definitely ties into the resistance to change you see in the community.
And often, if you look at just something like that really quickly, people look at it, and in principle, we support the density, because if we, to get more affordable housing, we do need to get a bit denser. But what we've got to tie in with the density is we've got to tie in really good design and making sure the community facilities support it. And that's the key. It's this sort of bigger picture, not just thinking, oh, we've just got to build lots more housing. What we want to do is we want to build homes rather than houses, and we want to build really strong communities and positive communities for New Zealanders.
Yeah. And what role do you see innovation playing in that space?
Yeah, I think innovation is quite critical, and because innovation across a whole, has such an impact, whether it's in business, whether it's in society, whether it's, the actual technology advancements. And most people often associate innovation just with technology. And there's a lot of really good technology stuff going on. And, the likes of what you guys are doing is one of them with data, and how do we better use data and understand it. And we know, the advancements in technology around big data, and but then it's about how can we use that data for better. How do we use it for around things like smart cities, and tying in with data and smart cities, and therefore getting better outcomes for our communities. So the data and that technology side is a big thing, and it's great to be watching it, because I said it's 25 years ago since we launched Relabs, which at the time was so out there. And when we launched in 1996, it was actually the first major commercial website launched in New Zealand. And lots of people used to say to me, Leonie, no one's ever going to buy property this way. What the heck are you doing? But it just shows that things change, and I know they will continue to change. So the data, I think, is an absolute critical one. Then I look at different parts of property. So, construction is one often people hear about, and there's a lot of technology, a lot of innovation going on in that space. And you'll sometimes see things like 3D printed houses or office blocks, or you'll see the automated bricklayers who can come in and do stuff. And so there is a lot of really smart innovation in the space, and also around the materials. And I've worked with some of these organisations over the years, and the biggest challenge for them is I actually think there's an amazing amount of innovation out there, and some really good stuff going on in New Zealand. But then they come across the sort of the barriers of our legislative and consenting framework, and how difficult it is to actually bring any of these new concepts, designs, all that sort of stuff, to actually comply with our legislative framework, and also our consenting framework. And I remember a few years ago when I was doing a lot in the housing space, and a guy rang me up and he said, Leonie, I've worked for 3 years, to develop some product, and this will enable construction of houses to be at half the price. And he'd invested a whole lot of money and spent 3 years, and he'd managed to get through the legislative framework, and then some part through the consenting framework, but he just could not get the adoption of it by the councils. And in the end, he said to me, I'm going to have to give up and go back to my traditional build. And so we've got to think, when I think about innovation, we've got to think about how do we get it adopted. And one of the things I think we really, as a sector, need to think about is almost having an innovation hub, sort of that starts right at the beginning, where you can test a whole lot of the stuff, and then it becomes adopted as an industry, rather than relying on every single builder or developer to have to test new things, because it's just too expensive and too time consuming. I look at, from another perspective in property, where I know a lot of people are thinking at the moment, is the impact of technology on and societal change on workspaces. So if you think about, say, for example, office premises, and you then look at how we use them now. So it's gone from years back where it was traditional and everybody came into an office, and now it's a lot more flexible, and you tend to have a lot of hot desking, and it's open plan and all that sort of stuff. There's a huge amount of technology gone into efficiency of buildings and being able to monitor things from a sustainability perspective. So it's quite exciting what we're seeing in that, and particularly what we're seeing overseas that will come in. Then you look at things like the retail side, and you've got online versus traditional going to a shop. And then if anyone's been to some of the shopping centres, you can see that the concept of shopping centres has changed dramatically from traditional just going to buy something to actually more experiential. So this is a lot of the innovation that you're seeing that's coming through. You're seeing the whole cars and car parking and drones and all that sort of stuff is going to come and have a bigger impact. You then look at financing. So financing is such a big thing in property because we don't have finance, can't do anything. And you're seeing where people, smaller people can have some sort of investment opportunity, whether it's Sharesies or Jasper or things like that. I also think banking is going to be disrupted. You've only got to see what's happening in that space. And then, like I said before, we've got some systemic problems. So how do we get the whole property development process working much better, efficiently, and more cost effective? And then we've also got that innovation because we've got this whole societal change driving change, whether it's more purpose-driven, more sustainability, climate change, all that sort of stuff. So it's like there's a whole plethora of innovation that's happening in our industry, which is quite exciting. But I also really want to try and figure out how do we capture it and then use it so we benefit, because I've just seen so much happen and then it just doesn't filter through, and that's quite sad.
Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat, that might tie well into the trouble with consents. Why are we not supporting more modular house building as in Europe?
Yes, and so again, that's another one of the things that we need to address, and it's an absolute critical thing. And so one of the challenges with modular housing is that, yes, it all makes sense. It's sort of getting more acceptance now in terms of being able to get through some consenting, because that was a real challenge in the early days, both to comply with the legislation framework, and then you see each council has their own standards. So for example, if you're in Christchurch, you can drive 20 minutes and you're dealing with 3 different councils with 3 different consenting requirements. So you can start to see it's quite hard to sort of get some of these approvals in place. So that was part of it, and that is making progress. The second thing is that modular housing doesn't get, it's harder to get finance. So, if you build a house and it's being built on site, the bank will give you money as progress payments. The bank don't like it if you've got a house being built in a factory because it's not on the land and they haven't got security. So that's another sort of issue we've got to address. And then it's also about scale. So modular, you need scale. And so part of the challenge is to get scale here to make it work. And also, and this becomes sort of a little bit of a Kiwi thing. A lot of Kiwis don't like standardised housing. They want their own. So but modular is definitely one of the key things. But again, it's just it's a classic example of some of the barriers that, because you sit back and think, shit, this is really good and makes a lot of sense, but it's just an example of so many of the barriers that you find in trying to implement it.
Yeah. And as you mentioned before, there was a property conference not too long ago. Do you have any examples of companies actually trying to solve these problems just through innovation?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot going on. So you can look at some of the places where, say, for example, Mike Greer Homes have actually built Concision, which is a factory where they build the houses in the factory premises. So there's a lot going on in that space. I mean, I've seen stuff where you're starting to see some 3D printing going on, but it's not. I still think it's not at a scale yet that is really having that much of an impact. And there is quite a bit going on in the modular space as well. But we also have to think about the sort of the construction model and how we actually have our traditional builders and how that whole business model works and how do we change that. And the other thing is, if back to our modular thing, I've seen some examples where you've had some modular companies building houses and they're fantastic in the factory, but you still have to deal with all the challenges to then get it on site. So that's everything from, the resource planning and the consenting and then getting it on site, and then you've still got to get all the approvals, and then you've still got to get all the sort of water and everything hooked up. So the modular bit is fantastic, but there's still some challenges on that wider thing. So we have got some, there's a lot of space for improvement yet to go.
Yeah. And Knight, I have a quick question for you. In the data space, how does Relab play a role in the innovation area?
Leonie, great to have you on. Thanks, Stacey. Yes, as you touched on, Relab, we are a startup and we specialize in providing data and insight all in one place for property professionals. Yes, data does play a big role because without data, you can't really make good decisions. And I was just taking some notes when Leonie was talking. I like to just maybe share our little experience as a little startup. We started back in 2016, and back then there was no homes or one roof, or none of the other site actually existed. I mean, realestate.co was definitely there, but we started the site just thinking, hey, we can see more data become available. How do we bring the data all in one place? So we built a site, and people started using Relab to look up school zones, to find out valuation, to find out how many bedrooms and bathrooms, etc. And the name behind Relab, as some might wonder, and it's quite an obscure name, RELAB. It actually stands for real estate, RE, and lab is our aspiration to dig deep into data and provide more analytics and more insights to our users. But the business wasn't going very well for the first 4 years. We spent 2016 to 2000 last year. We built a website. People are using it. We couldn't commercialize it. We struggled for 4 years. But the penny drop moment for us was we actually asked ourselves the question, what problem are we actually solving for our users? And it was pretty hard. And not easy. And the way we did it is we just went out and interviewed our prospective users. They're all property professionals. Some of them are architects, surveyors, valuers, real estate agents, etc. And just ask them, what's your number one pain point in your day-to-day job? What's a problem that's painful, it takes you time that you'd like to change? And many of them come back to say that to do initial due diligence or research on a site, they have to jump through 6, 7, 8, 10 different systems. And half of them, you can't use them on mobile. So that's how we went, that's what we can do by bringing everything into one platform. It is accurate, it is timely, it is professional. So that's, I guess, our little transformation. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is I absolutely agree with everything you said, Leonie, regarding innovation is not just technology. Innovation can take place in any field that you want to improve on. It could be customer service. It could be changing a different brand message to try out whether they engage with your audience. But it can be data and insight. That's definitely our aspiration, is to continue hone in our data skills, but it needs to be customer based. We need to not lose sight of what our customers want from us and keep building product that ticks the box for them.
And I think too, just a huge credit to you guys, because I think sometimes what people, what I've noticed over the years and been around for a bit longer is when something becomes really obvious, then everyone says, oh, well, that was really obvious, but they don't realize how hard it actually is when you launch a startup. And, I imagine for you as it was for us back in the day, it's a huge roller coaster ride. And that's why I've often used, if you want to change something, I actually do use the example of realestate.co sometimes now, because everybody looks at it today and, particularly younger ones, they couldn't imagine doing it any other way. But back in 1995, people thought I was completely crazy. And they used to tell me that. I got laughed at in meetings. I was told I was crazy. Some of the wise heads in the real estate industry said to me, Leonie, nobody will ever buy property this way. And, so a lot of it is about, perseverance and sort of keeping with it sometimes and making, understanding what's driving you. And because those early years are pretty tough. And so, just wanted to extend my huge, recognition of that, because I know that they are tough times. And I'm sure people will say to you sometimes now, oh, well, that was a really obvious idea, but it's still jolly difficult to get there.
Yeah, and For both you, Knight and Leonie, I guess you kind of touched a bit on this just now, Leonie, but what advice do you have for property professionals, definitely in terms of resilience and trying to solve these problems with all the hurdles that they have?
Yeah, so I think that when I think about that, there are always times of change and challenge. And we all know, look, the last couple of years have been a tough time. But if you think about Einstein, he says that in the midst of every crisis comes opportunity. So sometimes at the back of my mind, I try and do that. One of the things that's always really important to me is, as you probably gathered, I haven't followed a traditional career path as such, but I've been very purpose-driven, and I'm and to be clear on what's my why. So what's driving me for each of the projects that I'm doing? Because if you are in those really tough times, as you were alluding to before, sometimes that purpose is the only thing that keeps you going. And I've had some of those times as well with different businesses, and you're thinking, what the heck am I doing? And but if you're clear on what your purpose is, that can get you through that, because sometimes you just got to keep going. And I think also it's about a little bit of perspective as well. So I often talk to my team. We've been in lockdown in Auckland for a while, and it's pretty tough. But if I often start about what are we grateful for, and I talk to the team, and we all have got places to live. Friends and family are generally okay. We've got enough to eat, we've got good health, all that sort of stuff. So sometimes it's about perspective, and then the challenge sits around it. Then I think it's also about, finding your support networks around, friends and family, business support, whether that's mentoring or just having someone to be able to talk to. Obviously health, looking after yourself and finding ways to do that. I think that is also really important. And then realizing, we all want to control things, and but we can't control everything. So understand what you can control and then do something about it, and then realize and perhaps release some of the things that you can't control. Like, at the moment we can't control what's going on with COVID. Doesn't mean we all have to be in a state of depression. Doesn't mean sometimes we're not down about it, but it's sort of like realizing that we've just got to get through this. And I sometimes think resilience is a bit like building a muscle, that some tough times that you've gone through, when you reflect back, you might think, jeepers, I wish I didn't have to go through that. But, it does really strengthen you, and it makes it easier for the next time to have those times. So, look at resilience as a bit of a muscle to build.
Yes, that's really well said. I think, can I just quickly tag on to what you said in terms of, the question was, how do we deal with resilience to make sure, personally we're doing well, our family are doing well, and our colleagues are doing well. I think network is super important. At times you could feel this is just a hard grind. Is it just me, or are there other people out there? And how do I reach out to them so that we can share our success recipes? And then I kind of extend the thinking to think about innovation. Do we all have to try very hard to innovate in our own field, or can we have more collaboration with people in the wider community, whether there are suppliers, whether there are customers? I really love your idea around some sort of innovation hub, innovation center. And we are a small startup, a tech startup, and we're part of the Ice House community, which is the startup. I think you're very familiar with the Ice House, Leonie. So I don't know, just think out loud. Wouldn't it be great if we have the Ice House or the incubator center or the innovation hub for the property industry, where there's right?
Absolutely. And I think you're totally right, because one of the things I think I often think about innovation is, because if someone said to me, so how do you come up with these ideas sometimes before other people see them? And it's not, you often don't have eureka moments. I often say, if you've ever looked at your blood underneath the microscope, you've got all these sort of circles that are moving around. And I often think it's about creating some networks of people where you might bounce into them, and I've got a half-baked idea and you've got a half-baked idea, but together, we come up with something quite special, and that could be, really quite clever. And so I think that, I often say to people, you want to create your own sort of smaller hubs around innovation and get people around you. They don't have to be in the same sector, but are open to sharing some crazy ideas and maybe questioning and thinking in a different way and turning upside down. So I think at a personal level, I recommend everyone does that. But at a sector level, you are absolutely right. And that's why I think the Ice House has been so strong and had such a big impact on so many businesses, because it sort of is a place where people can go and like-minded, and as a support and infrastructure. And I think if we could do that in property somehow, that would help in so many different ways to help sort of bring a very fragmented sector together to help resolve some of the bigger issues.
Spotted a question in the chat channel. I'm just going to read out loud because I think this is super relevant to what we're talking about here, Stacey, if that's okay, and Leonie. So this question is from James. As a land development engineer, I'm finding there's a lot of changes coming in the three water space and landform design, especially with regard to sustainable urban design, better community outcomes. Unfortunately, there's no model or standard for councils to assess those against or for us engineers to design to. We'll have to pioneer change with brave developers and planners. And I guess the undertone there is there's the risks and costs that comes with the pioneering changes. So Leonie, what's your perspective on James's comment?
Yeah, and look, he's right. And I think we've got, there's a lot of change going on at the moment in a legislative framework space. So, we've seen a bit lately around Three Waters. There's the Resource Management Act. There's the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. There's, and I just lose track of all the other bits of legislation we're working on. What worries me with what's going on at the moment is there is so much change. And because at Property Council, we sort of represent the industry on a lot of these topics. And what worries me, because we're a sort of a central point, is that I don't see a lot of coordination between much of the legislation happening at a national at a central government or a local government level. And so James is absolutely right, because if you don't have that coordination, then when you're trying to apply it, it can create a whole lot of problems and unintended consequences, which cause more time and cost more money. One of the things, and I'm not sure it's working yet, but what we are trying is to say with all these bits of legislation, we're trying to get government more connected up. What we're also saying is that before they pass any legislation, that we road test it. Because it's easy if you're sitting in Wellington and writing policy or some legal documents, you're not the one that's got to actually apply it. And so what we're trying to encourage them is that when they think they've got the framework of the legislation, then actually come and test it with us and a range of our members like James from an engineering perspective and many others who can say, okay, how's this actually going to work in practice and what is it going to mean? And because I'm really concerned that, a lot of this is designed to try and create more affordable housing and speed the process up, but I actually think it runs the risk of being the opposite. And then I look at, Three Waters, which is, there's a lot of change happening in that. And we know in the last 18 months, because of a definition of wetlands, which basically ended up being every bit of creek or bit of water in somebody's paddock ended up being a wetland, and that often delayed developments by a long time. So we've got to try and make sure that when we bring this stuff in, that there are the models that James is talking about, that we've actually tested it and we know how it's going to operate before it is passed and brought into actual being. And because at the moment I see a big disconnection between the people who are developing legislation and policy and the rest of us who are having to implement. And so I suppose that comes back to my whole system approach. We've got to get so much smarter in how we do this stuff. And I know a lot of people that deal with central or local government often find it quite frustrating, but and it can be. And trust me, during COVID, I've had some very challenging times. But I fundamentally believe one of the innovations to solve some of our bigger problems has to be that we all have to work together. public sector, private sector, iwi, community housing sector, the finance community, if we want to solve some of these things. And we've just got to get a lot smarter. And like you said, that's the way that we can pioneer some of the stuff and make it happen. So, you know, I'm always trying to be on the hopeful side and advocating for positive change, but there are some big challenges coming.
Cool. No, I completely agree with you. I can see James has given Mark a thumb up saying, now we're talking, let's create a property hub and innovation center. Love your comment, guys. Keep it coming. I agree 100%, Leonie, and I think of the space we're in. We're a technology startup, and I've been quite fortunate enough to be mentored by a great Kiwi global entrepreneur, Linda Jenkinson.
I know Linda.
Awesome. And I remember how she phrased growth and innovation for us entrepreneurs and startup founders. The way she put it is simple. In terms of, if you look at all the businesses in New Zealand or globally, you have a lot of small to medium businesses, SMEs or sole traders on one end of the scale. You have a lot of large corporates on the other end of the scale. And their modus operandi are different. You know, for SMEs, it's about cash flow today. Can I pay my employees and myself today? So they care about cash flow. For larger companies with boards and governance structures, they care about risk. How do we make sure we're compliant, and the risks, and they're talking about the 10-year plan. There is a big gap in the middle, which is innovation or growth companies who you need to be brave enough, like James here, pushing the boundaries, at the same time making sure you mitigate your potential risk. But growth and innovation should take priority, I guess, because you're always looking at risk adverse. You might as well just have no change. So love and there are parallels, because in terms of stakeholders, councils, they are 100% mandated to look at risks and compliance versus, our innovative land development engineer here. He's trying to push the boundaries and look at how do I do things better, quicker, a better outcome. So how do we meet in the middle? And Mark said here, be the change. Yes, if you want to see be the change you want to see.
That's all Mahatma Gandhi, and you're absolutely right. It is, it is about how do we come together, and I often used to look at it and think, the private sector look at the public sector and think they take a long time and don't make any decisions, and the public sector look at the private sector and think the private sector is just about making money. And I've often used the analogy of, I don't know if people remember a book from years ago, it was called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And I've often thought we should have a new book called The Public Sector Are From Mars and the Private Sector Are From Venus. And but at the end of the day, whilst we might sort of come from quite different planets, if we need to make things work, we've actually got to get married, and sort of come together. And like marriage, you don't have to be exactly the same, but it's about sharing some values. And also, the more we can understand each other and walk in each other's shoes, because having spent a bit of time in the public sector, for someone like me, it's a bit strange, but there are some challenges that you certainly don't have in the private sector. And it's driven, like you said, by different drivers. But then you come back to the private sector, and obviously we're driven by different drivers as well. But we've got to find a way to build these really trusted partnerships and relationships where we're trying to work together. And one of the things Property Council launched a couple of years ago, it's been a bit hard during COVID this last year, but you can either get frustrated with each other or you can try and do something about it. So we launched what we call Development Essentials, and it's about training, and it's for the decision makers from politicians and ministers through to government officials involved in property, and just giving them the basics about how development actually works. Because as James was touching before, it's quite a long, extensive, and quite complex process. And a lot of people that don't understand the development process think it's just about when you build something on the site, not realizing that actually the bulk of the work is before you even start construction on a site. So, and again, trying to say, okay, come in and we'll help you try and understand our sector better, because we know we've got to do it together. And we hope by running those, the central and local government officials go back and understand things a bit better, and maybe give a bit better advice, or know where to come and ask questions. And so we're trying, I've been trying to shift Property Council to two major shifts. One is around for the public sector. We're trying to be seen not as advocates but as trusted advisors, and so that we can help them in the process they're going to. And then the second one where we're trying to shift it is sometimes the public associates property owners or many of our guys as greedy grubby developers or property fat cats, and rather than actually really important contributors, because as you Stacey, you touched on at the start, we contribute 15% of GDP to New Zealand and employ over 200,000 people. So it's a really important contributor to New Zealand, and I'm trying to sort of shift it to say we're really important contributors. It's not just all about us, because the vast majority of people in our sector are very, very purpose driven and want to create communities or buildings or whatever they do, in a really positive way.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with private and public needing to marry up. I can see that's often the pain points that people talk about, especially with development, etc. Is there anyone in the chat who has any questions for Leonie or Knight?
I just saw the question from Matt about EHomes, and I had a little bit to do with them and work with those guys. And EHomes was a great startup initiative about building a modular factory, and they did, they actually did a great job. And where the problems for them, and this is why I touched on the challenges around modular housing, is that they couldn't get the scale that, because they could produce so many you can produce houses in a factory quite quickly. They needed to have the sales at the other end so that they could go and use them, because your investment in a massive big factory is quite extensive. And so that's what I mean when we look at some of this innovation. The technology is there, but the whole system isn't quite there. And I thought that was a really disappointing and sad outcome for EHomes, because they were really good. The concept of what they were trying to do was great. And we know that, if you play in that innovative space, particularly at the disruptive end, there can be some real challenges if you have these great ideas, but the timing's not quite right, or, the outcomes aren't quite right.
Yeah, and I think there was another question saying that we need to educate builders and customers of the benefits, and that's probably quite an important part, is when customers aren't educated at the end point, they aren't who's to know that they should be buying these homes
Yes,
in this way.
Yeah, and that's right, and it's like you guys can start off with your concept of your data, and it's great, but it takes it's sort of, where does it get to the tipping point where people really, really get it, and I remember in Relians in the early days, here we are back in 1996, and I knew it was a great idea. I knew this was going to be the future of the industry, but trying to get people and it just took a lot of time for people to be confident. And I can remember, you guys will laugh at this now, but most real estate agents at the time didn't even have email addresses. And so what we would do at the time, if somebody sent an inquiry in about a particular property, it would come to us at Relians, and then we would print it out and fax it to the agent. They would scribble an answer and send it back. And you'll laugh about this too in terms of the data, because now all the data it's all electronic and everything comes together. But when we launched in 1996, we used to get the real estate agents to fax us a listing form and post us a photo. And that's how we got the data. And I had a data entry team who spent all day entering data to put up on the internet, because nothing was automated. So, it just shows you, some of these things, but it just takes time for that tipping point when suddenly it becomes, far more normal and accepted. And then you get the point where everyone thinks, well, hasn't it always been this way? And it's exactly what you guys have been through as well, as you got clearer on where you want to go. And that's why I often say, if you are at that front point, and it is quite disruptive, because it's a bit easier if you're just transforming something, but if you're at that disruptive edge, you've really got to have, sometimes it's a matter of just keeping going and persevering while everybody else catches up with your idea.
Yeah, totally.
For you, Leonie, starting out an internet venture back in, did you say 1995?
Yeah, so I first started talking about it in 1995, and yeah, that was, I mean, we launched Relabs 6 weeks after Telecom launched Extra, so that's how early it was. And but I just knew that it was really important at that time, and I used to say to the real estate industry, this is your one time to effectively own the newspaper of the future. And because they all used to complain about how much they spent in advertising, and I said, the industry will get one chance to own this, and this is now, because there was lots of competition coming on from the media, and I just kept saying, you get this one chance to own it. And imagine, I used to say to them all, imagine how much you would charge yourself today if you owned in advertising, if you owned the New Zealand Herald. And because I said, this is effectively the herald of the future, and the industry has one chance to actually own it, because as you've realized, it's about how you bring data together and then how you use it, and whoever controls that data is king, and that's sort of where it was. But it was certainly very, very, very early days, and there were some real challenging times.
I think Jeff Bezos started up Amazon just a year before. So if you were launching the New York, you would have been, number one of the rich list in the world.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, I say to people, Yahoo was the main search engine of the day back then, because Google hadn't even been invented. So it sort of, it just puts it in perspective about, how you can do these things and how it works. And but I just, looking, James sort of said, what about some things going forward? And I thought, one of the things, and I haven't done a lot of work in it yet because I haven't had that much chance, but sometimes people say to me in property, so what do I think is the equivalent of Relabs in 2021? What might that change be today? And I actually think that whole area around blockchain, I think, could have a massive impact in the property sector, and not just the Bitcoin stuff, but actually the blockchain and how things might work in terms of data and quality checking and progressing products and all sorts of stuff. And I don't know, I haven't looked at it much more, but people do ask me that question, and I've sometimes thought about how might that be that next real significant change. So it's probably not something that I can do right at the moment, but I'm sure somebody else is looking at it, because I reckon that's a good one.
Maybe you can save this for a future webinar, Leonie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we are tracking well over 45 minutes. So I'll wrap up there. But thank you so much for all the questions in the chat, and thank you, Leonie, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
No problem, and always happy to help. And like I said, we really appreciated you coming at ours. And look, I'm really passionate about obviously property, as you can gather, and change and innovation and stuff for the better. So I love talking about this stuff, and and I hope it sort of gives somebody a taste of something that they might go do something positive, because when it needs all of us in our own ways making change to improve things for everybody. And I often think there's a lot of people who I call them energy zappers, or a bit negative, or that I call them the people that start with no, and I'm sure you know those people. And so we know there's plenty of those people, but we need the people with the ideas and the positiveness and the drive and the resilience to actually make real positive change. So I love talking about this stuff. So anytime, I'm more than happy.
Yeah, Mark said, Leonie, I could listen to you all day, so I'll have to do another one.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
Cool, awesome. Thanks, guys. We will chat soon.
Thanks very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
around. Bye.